Good evening. Welcome to the Cancer Education Series. I'm Dick Deming. I'm Medical Director of MercyOne Cancer Center and the founder of Above and Beyond Cancer. Our Cancer Education Series is a collaboration between MercyOne and Above and Beyond, and it is brought to you with support from the Iowa Cancer Consortium. And you guys are in for a treat, and I'm in for a treat tonight because I've got three of my favorite people here. So I'm just going to briefly introduce our guests, and then they'll say more about themselves. But the topic tonight is the healing power of poetry. And we have with us tonight definitely four poetry fans, and we also have some poets. And our group today includes, at the far end, Judy Conlon. Judy, among other things, is a cancer survivor. She was an Iowa State professor, and she taught English and also women's studies. And she's done a number of, had a number of positions with various not-for-profits dealing with refugees and international relationships. And we're just really happy to have you here with us, Judy.
Well, I'm delighted to be here.
And sitting next to Judy is Rebecca Christian, and Rebecca is also a cancer survivor, and she is also a poet, a playwright, and a newspaper columnist. And I'm hopeful that we get to hear her not just recite favorite poems by others, but some of her own poetry.
My pleasure.
Very good. And sitting next to me is Carmen Lampe Zeitler, and I actually met Carmen at one of her monthly poetry salons that she and her husband have in their own home. Carmen is, number one, a baseball fan, and the Yankees are playing tonight, and so that is going to be in the back of her mind. But she also does a lot of things and has been involved in not-for-profit management, especially with children and family urban movement here in Des Moines. So welcome, Carmen.
Good to be here. Thank you for hosting us.
You are welcome. So we're going to start off with each of us sharing one of our poems. And then we're going to follow that with a little bit of conversation about the healing power of poetry and what poetry has meant to each of us in our personal and or professional lives. And then we'll round out the rest of the hour with just sharing some beautiful poetry and looking at, I think we have more than we're going to be able to even share with you, but that's going to be the main focus of tonight. But let's start off with each of us sharing a poem, and then we'll talk about kind of what each of these poems means to us, but in general, how poetry can have a healing effect. So let's start with you, Judy.
Okay, fine, good. Well, I'm choosing to begin with the poem Wonder Woman by Ada Lyman. And I think it's an important poem because it's from the point of view of a woman who has received a diagnosis that is clearly serious. And it tells us a lot about her, and it tells us, I think, a lot about how we can experience a challenge. It goes like this. Standing at the swell of the muddy Mississippi after the urgent care doctor had just said, well, sometimes shit happens. I fell fast and hard for New Orleans all over again. Pain pills swirled in the purse along with a spell for later. It's taken a while for me to admit I am in a raging battle with my body. A spinal column 35 degrees bent, vertigo that comes and goes like a DC Comics villain nobody can kill. Invisible pain is both a blessing and a curse. You always look so happy, said a stranger once, as I shifted to my good side, grinning. But that day, alone on the riverbank, brass blaring from the steamboat Natchez, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a girl, maybe half my age, dressed for no apparent reason as Wonder Woman. She strutted by in all her strength and glory, invincible, eternal. And when I stood to clap, because who wouldn't, she bowed and posed like she knew I needed a myth. A woman by a river, indestructible.
Beautiful. Thank you, Judy. Rebecca?
Yes. This is a poem I wrote when I was having treatment myself for breast cancer, and it was kind of a low point, and it's called The Elegance of Slow Poisoning. Chemotherapy terminology has it wrong. Taxotere sounds tame. Why not hemlock? Not Cytoxin, but deadly nightshade. Agatha Christie had it right. For suspense, you cannot surpass the elegance of slow poisoning. One day, the lips white as the linen that wrapped the young cowboy, as cold as the day. The next, the roof of the mouth as roughly textured as saddle hide. The nose running, the eyes glazed. Then beloved coffee turned to river mud and blessed wine to vinegar by the treacherous taste buds. At night, the turncoat joints clamoring in the bedroom where the old lady whispers, hush. The hair in the drain in morbid swirls like that harvested from the departed and woven into mementos in Victorian times. Not even a brow to raise at having given permission for this mayhem, this invasion of one's own Normandy, the good cells up to their hips in water as deep as the bad.
Oh, very nice.
Thank you.
Thank you. Carmen?
Well, it's hard to follow that personal experience and eloquence. This poem is called When I Taught Her to Tie Her Shoes, and it's by a poet that's new to me. Her name is Penny Harder, and it came out of this book called Poetry of Presence, an anthology of mindfulness poems, and it's just one of those anthologies that is full of fabulous poems, and this is one of them. When I Taught Her to Tie Her Shoes. A revelation, this student already in high school who didn't know how to tie her shoes. I took her into the book room knowing what I needed to teach was perhaps more important than Shakespeare or grammar, guided her hands through the looping, the pulling of the ends. After several tries, she got it, walked out of there empowered. How many things are like that? Skills never mastered in childhood, simple tasks ignored, let go for years. This morning, my head bald from chemotherapy, my feet farther away than they used to be as I bend to my own shoes, that student returns to teach me the meaning of life, to simply tie my laces and walk out of myself into this sunny winter day.
Beautiful. And I get the opportunity now to share a poem, and this is by former poet laureate W.S. Merwin. And this poem I kind of like this year because of all that everybody is going through, and it's called Here Together. These days, I can see us clinging to each other as we are swept along by the current. I am clinging to you to keep you from being swept away, and you are clinging to me to keep me from being swept away from you. We see the shores blurring past as we hold each other in the rushing current. The daylight rushes unheard far above us. How long will we be swept along in the daylight? How long will we cling together in the night? And where will it carry us together? So thank you all for sharing the poem. And, maybe we'll start with you, Rebecca, because you're a cancer survivor and you're a poet. So I would imagine that you have a long history with poetry that preceded your cancer. Maybe just talk about how you got exposed to poetry, and then maybe elaborate on how poetry, reading and or writing, has been healing for you in your cancer journey.
Sure. My parents both loved poetry, and my dad was a teacher of English. You should never call him an English teacher because that would imply that he was British. Very exacting with language. And my mother had grown up taking elocution lessons by a teacher with this wonderful name of Lenore Anthony on Kansas City's Country Club Plaza. And so she would often recite poetry or read poetry to us, and often it would be on occasions like the Highwayman on Halloween. So I grew up around great literature and poems, both fun and silly. We would often write each other poetry for special occasions like birthdays, and usually very terrible poetry that was nonetheless pretty fun. And then one of the great joys of my grown-up life has been Carmen and John's poetry salon at their home. It's just a magical time. So many different people from walks of life, very different taste in poetry, some that rhymes, some that doesn't, and always some wonderful food. So kind of a potluck situation where we share both food and poetry. So that's been a great pleasure of mine, and also just studying poetry and reading poetry. And this is a piece I wrote. It actually is not so much of a poem as a newspaper column, but it is about after I got through with my pity party when I was in the worst of the treatment, I was able to say why I am almost glad I had cancer. I was startled when a young woman I know, a promising scientist, said she is grateful for her learning disabilities because they enable her to peer through a unique prism and appreciate others who are different. I don't think of myself as a cancer survivor because to me that has a melodramatic ring. I simply did what anyone would do, find good doctors and do what they told me to, which was to be cut, poisoned, and burned, surgery, chemotherapy, and radiation. Part of me remembers how nasty that was, but in a way, I feel like it happened to somebody else. After all, the brain, or maybe it's the spirit, has a wonderful amnesiac quality that enables women to even consider getting pregnant again after they've been through labor once. I have a hard time summoning up the details of my treatment 7 years ago, unless I am talking to someone who is newly diagnosed and needs to hear not platitudes, but the voice of experience. I had an aggressive tumor, some would say that fits my personality, that was detected early, so I think of myself as not so much afflicted as spared. I am not a cancer victim because breast cancer is frightfully common, and although I had no family history or risk factors, I am a hem of a certain age. Recently, I lunched with a foursome of women contemporaries, early 60s, and 3 of us had gone through cancer. While I have eluded the eternal footman for now, the experience keeps prompting me to beg the big question, spared for what? The illness caused me to make some difficult changes. I decided I had to let a longtime friendship go because it was taking too much out of me at a time when I had no reserves. Cancer also factored into my decision to retire a few years earlier than I had planned. Seize the day. I am a little nicer after discovering how kind people can be, from strangers to close friends. Also, cancer convinced me of what we all know but can't quite feel in the gut until a near miss, that one day, even precious little me, myself, and I will and truly die. Thus, I'm a little more grateful, a little less likely to rant at bloody Mediacom on the telephone, a little more inclined to let Butinskis into my lane of traffic. I am now more cautious because being absolutely sure that you will one day lose your life makes it infinitely more precious. In iffy weather, I wear only shoes with good traction. As a pedestrian, I seldom dash across the street, even when there are no cars coming, until, just like the Grim Reaper will one day, the ghostly white walk figure beckons me on. I didn't go through chemotherapy to get run over. I am also less vain. There is nothing like meeting your new husband's ex-wife for the first time with very little hair, eyebrows, or eyelashes to make you get over yourself. I also think that trauma bonding strengthened my young marriage. My husband and I were wed on a Saturday, and I started treatment the following Wednesday. When my tresses started to appear on my pillow and swirl down the drain, I asked him to shave my head. As in the beautiful Leonard Cohen song, Hallelujah, he put me in a kitchen chair and cut my hair. That is, after pouring me a huge scotch, lighting a candle, and starting Coltrane on the stereo. After my mane was buzzed off, I looked into his eyes and saw nothing but love. I believe it took cancer to make me live more fully. For that, I'm glad.
Yeah, that's so nice. You're someone who writes, so someone has said, you probably would know who I don't know. I'm just paraphrasing. I don't know what I think till I see what I write. And I'm wondering, to what extent does the act of writing solidify your thoughts? Obviously, it's a beautiful essay, almost prose poetry. To what extent would those thoughts not have existed if you didn't sit down to put them on paper? Maybe just elaborate or reflect on the role of the actual writing something down and the relationship to creating the thought, or amplifying the thought, or permanizing the thought.
Well, it's pretty organic, and it's depending on if I have a deadline or I'm just writing something from my heart. When you get in the zone, like I think maybe I was in the zone when I wrote this one, you're not really writing, you're being written through. And I don't know what you would call that force that writes through you.
Mm-hmm.
But it feels like it's not even me personally. It's something bigger.
Yeah. And I would dare say, correct me if I'm wrong, but those thoughts may not have come to mind if you weren't forcing, but if you weren't creating something in writing.
Yeah, I think if you kind of have to turn that rusty faucet on and play around for a while before you get to the good water.
Okay. So right now, again, we're sort of elaborating how poetry has had a healing influence on our lives, whether it's through our cancer journey or other aspects of our lives. So Judy, as someone who has taught English, I'm sure that you probably gained an affinity for poetry as a child, and maybe elaborate on how you came to know poetry, but then specifically the role poetry plays in the healing process.
Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't come to poetry or reading as a child. We didn't have books in my house. We had comic books. And so when I discovered, I remember I was sitting in my sorority house bedroom, and I'm reading a very, probably to many people's points of view, very tedious essay by Emerson on self-reliance. And I'm just joyful. And I said out loud, "By George, I'm a scholar." And that excitement over literature and thinking and feeling, and so much of poetry is also feeling. I know when I was diagnosed with cancer, I went from A to Z, okay, this is it, I'm going to die. And it's not a rational response. It's not a reasonable response. There's nothing logical about it. I think that's one of the things that poetry does for us. It's about feeling and sensibility and imagery and language. And so I fell in love with words and was so grateful, and my excitement and gratitude really for words, poetry, prose, has just never stopped.
Great. Thank you. Let's turn to you, Carmen. So, Carmen, maybe elaborate on, we all have bumps in the road of life. We all go through suffering. And I like to think of poetry as having a healing effect, no matter what the source of suffering is. Is that something that rings true for you? Maybe share with us, what was the first poem you can ever remember back from your childhood? And second, how would you describe the impact poetry has on your life?
Well, unlike Judy, I didn't have a lot of exposure when I was a child, but my grandmother had an anthology of poetry, and the poem I remember is Trees by Joyce Kilmer. And I remember reading that, and there was a little woodcut at the top of the trees, and it was a beautiful book. And my probably 8 or 9, So just that feeling of, oh, this must be important. But I think poetry didn't really take hold of me till I was in high school. And I had a couple of English teachers that exposed us to the poetry of Langston Hughes and James Maudlin. And as a, little white girl living in small town Iowa, I understood more of an experience of somebody that wasn't like me, and the difficulty of those experiences. And poetry opened all that up more than anything I've ever read in a history book. And I was a history major eventually. So there's always sort of been that draw to poetry. And then as an adult, I just started reading more. Years ago, I went to an event that the Children's Defense Fund puts on every year for child advocacy. And Frederick Streets, who was the first African-American chaplain at Yale University, shared in a workshop that when he was in the 5th grade, his teacher had him read and memorize a poem called Your World by a woman named Georgia Douglas Johnson, and that as a 5th grader, his worldview was changed. And so that inspired me to come back and do poetry with kids at CFUM, and just had a wonderful experience with all of that too. So the spectrum that poetry can affect in our lives is just phenomenal. When I've had friends who have gone through serious illness, cancer, I have maybe sent them a bouquet of poems or a portfolio of poems. And thinking about that, I think the reason I did it comes from a poem by one of your poets, your favorite poets, Mary Oliver. And the poem is Mysteries, yes, but the line is, how people come from delight or the scars of damage to the comfort of a poem. So I think that there is that, in terms of healing and connection to poetry when things are particularly hard and when things are particularly amazing.
Yeah. Why don't you share the whole poem?
I
Do you
can
have
that.
it?
Yeah, I do.
There? Yes,
Right here.
mysteries, yes.
I do have mysteries, yes. So I sort of categorize these poems as ones that focus on courage and resilience, ones that focus on the bigger picture, like the Merwin poem that you read, I think, and the larger connections, and then poems that focus on affirmation, encouragement, and comfort. So this one is in the bigger picture part of my collection. So it goes like this. Truly, we live with mysteries too marvelous to be understood. How grass can be nourishing in the mouths of lambs, how rivers and stones are forever in allegiance with gravity while we ourselves dream of rising, how 2 hands touch and the bonds will never be broken, how people come from delight or the scars of damage to the comfort of a poem. Let me keep my distance always from those who think they have the answers. Let me keep company always with those who say, look, and laugh in astonishment and bow their heads.
Yeah, beautiful. So we're all fans of Mary Oliver. Actually, the week, I think, after her death, one at your poetry salon, which was the one I attended, we focused on her poetry. So in terms of healing, so Edward Hirsch wrote that reading poetry is an adventure in renewal, a creative act, a perpetual beginning, and a rebirth of wonder. And I think it's that emotional sense of wonder. And I think one of the reasons that I like poetry, and that poetry means, yes, you could read a novel and get some deep thought, but boy, it takes a lot of time to read it. The thing about the poetry is it's so sparse compared to other forms of writing, and it just is like the condensation of the wonder and the emotion. And obviously, to write good poetry, you have to choose your words wisely, because you don't have that many words. You don't get a 600-page novel. So that's what I tend to like about it. I also use poetry not only to nourish myself, it puts me in reflection, it makes me grateful, it makes me marvel at how wonderful the world is, but I also like to use it to share with patients. So I often will share poems with patients, not usually the first time I meet them, but as I establish a relationship. And we share poetry. I also, when I have medical students, the final exam for the medical student is they have to share a poem that they like and actually read it. And so I'm going to take the prerogative and do one more poem, and then I'm going to turn it over to you guys, and we'll go back to Judy. This is another poem that I like for several reasons. One, it talks about this time of turmoil and difficulty, and it really does seem like the last few years everyone has felt the pressure of gloom. And second, it also brings in nature, and like poetry, nature has a healing effect on me and on many people. So what could be better than poetry in nature, about nature? And this is from Kentucky farmer poet Wendell Berry, and it is called The Peace of Wild Things, and peace as in Peace. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. Judy, we'll go back to you.
Well, I think I'll read a poem that one of the things about you, Dr. Deming, and this poem is that I remember I ran into you just a couple of days after my diagnosis, and I was coming out of the Civic Center, and I told you my diagnosis, and your response was so incredibly kind and caring. I'm thinking, how can you be so kind and caring? You've seen tens of thousands of patients, but there was something about the way in which you reacted to my cancer that just was so loving, so caring, and so very helpful. This poem feels as if somebody's walking along with you and giving you very kind and loving advice. So in your honor, among many ways, the poem is Beloved is Where We Begin. If you would enter into the wilderness, do not begin without a blessing. Do not leave without hearing who you are, beloved, named by the one who has traveled this path before you. Do not go without letting it echo in your ears. And if you find it is hard to let it into your heart, do not despair. That is what this journey is for. I cannot promise this blessing will free you from danger, from fear, from hunger or thirst, from the scorching of sun or the fall of the night. But I can tell you that on this path there will be help. I can tell you that on this way there will be rest. I can tell you that you will know the strange graces that come to our aid only on a road such as this, that fly to meet us, bearing comfort and strength, that come alongside us for no other cause than to lean themselves toward our ear and with their curious insistence whisper our name. Beloved, beloved, beloved.
Thank you, Judy. That was beautiful. We are surrounded by people who want to help us, and we just open ourselves to that. Rebecca.
Yes. Oh, the one I would like to read next is probably familiar to a lot of people. It's called Hope by Emily Dickinson. And my husband, John, proposed on a Sunday, and on the following Friday, a routine mammogram showed cancer. And we were going to be married a few months later, but then decided that we would like to go through this together as a married couple. And I asked my mother, who had great stage presence, to pick a poem that she could read at our wedding. And she did a very good job. But on the last line, her voice quivered just a little bit, which usually she would not have permitted herself to give into that. But hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could abash the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the cellist land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me.
Beautiful.
There are so many choices, but a poet that we've discovered the last few years is Clint Smith. And he was at the Bucksbaum lectures a few years ago at Drake with Billy Collins. They shared
yes.
an evening.
Yes.
So this poem is called For the Hardest Days. Some evenings, after days when the world feels like it has poured all its despair into me, when I am awash with burdens that rest atop my body like a burlap of jostling shadows, I find a place to watch the sunset. I dig my feet into a soil that has rebirthed itself a million times over. I listen to the sound of leaves as they decide whether or not it is time to descend from their branches. It is hard to describe the comfort one feels in sitting with something you trust will always be there, something you can count on to remain familiar when all else seems awry. How remarkable it is to know that so many have watched the same sun set before you. How the wind can carry pollen and drop it somewhere it has never been. How the leaves have always become the soil and then they become the leaves again. How maybe we are not so different from the leaves. How maybe we are also always being reborn to be something more than we once were. How maybe that's what waking up each morning is, a reminder that we are born of the same atoms as every plant and bird and mountains and ocean around us.
The interconnectedness of everything. Yes. So I'm going to share a poem now that this is 18th century, I think, Rainer Maria Rilke, so a sort of bohemian poet. And this is a translation by Joanna Macy. And it again goes to a sort of resilience in how, through difficulty we can find our inner strength. And it's called Let This Darkness Be a Bell Tower. Mm-hmm. Listen, quiet friend who has come so far. Feel how your breathing makes more space around you. Let this darkness be a bell tower and you the bell. As you ring, what batters you becomes your strength. Move back and forth into the change. What is it like, such intensity of pain? If the drink is bitter, turn yourself to wine. In this uncontainable night, be the mystery at the crossroads of your senses, the meaning discovered here. And if the world has ceased to hear you, say to the silent earth, I flow. To the rushing waters, speak, I am. That's a poem that, like many poems, I think it's meant to be spoken. It's the rhythm of it. And thinking back to the first poem I remember, I'm sure I heard before, but in 7th grade we had to memorize a poem. It was Casey at the Bat. I loved Casey at the Bat. There's something about, of course, the story and the mystery and the suspense, and then just the cadence and the rhymes. So I think that was my first poem, was Casey at the Bat.
I have to say, there was a man, he was a retired United Methodist pastor, and he could bring you to tears reciting that poem. I mean, it was just, in his 80s, he could recite that poem, and it was like, oh my gosh, it made me cry. Casey at the Bat.
The drama, the suspense, and the sadness, and the poor Mudville fans.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Judy, let's go back to you. We'll bring you the microphone here.
Okay.
Well, we all brought tons of poems, and we had a wonderful dinner a couple of months ago, all of us, and we sat around just sharing one poem after another, and you would recite one, and then you'd pull one out, and then you'd pull one out, and so you were talking about darkness, and so I'm going to talk about light, and I'm going to read a poem by Jan Richardson, Light. Blessed are you who bear the light in unbearable times, who testify to its endurance amid the unendurable, who bear witness to its persistence when everything seems in shadow and grief. Blessed are you in whom the light lives, in whom the brightness blazes, your heart a chapel, an altar where in the deepest night can be seen the fire that shines forth in you, in unaccountable faith, in stubborn hope, in love that illumines every broken thing it binds. I think one of the things I was looking for this session was the kind of poetry that addresses challenges and illness and ultimately survivorship and resilience and love. Love is so much a part of this, so that's just. And let me add another one. I think one of the things that struck me, and I'm just going to read the second stanza of this poem. When those of us who are diagnosed with cancer and we think, well, we've got a limited lifespan now, this is going to be it, we ask these questions. But the mind always wants one more, it has. One more bright day of sun, one more clear night in bed with the moon, one more hour to get the words right, one more chance for the heart in hiding to emerge from its thicket in dried grasses. As if this quiet day, with its tentative light, weren't enough, as if joy weren't strewn all around.
That is great. I'm feeling the healing power of poetry. I'm just telling you right now.
Yes.
I am feeling this sense of peace and wonder.
Yes, and enormous comfort and gentleness.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure.
Rebecca?
Sure. Well, this one resonated with me because about 20 years ago, I was having lunch with a friend and she gave me the news that her husband had breast cancer. I'd never heard of breast cancer in a man. And she told me, please not to tell anyone else because her husband was so humiliated that he had breast cancer. And so now we're hearing more about that. And so this is from Herb Wagner, A Man's Pink. We've added some blue to the sea of pink to ensure that all men will pause and think. Breast cancer is a disease that affects men too, and that's why we've added the blue. Breast cancer awareness and breast self-exam are not just for a woman, they're also for a man. A Man's Pink teaches us to pause and think, and that's why we've added the blue. To increase survivor rates, we're striving to proclaim the third week of October as Awareness Week for men. Increasing awareness allows us to survive, and that's why we've added the blue. We've added some blue to the sea of pink to ensure that all men will pause and think. Breast cancer's a disease that affects men too, and that's why we've added the blue.
Nice. Yes, we're learning more and more about men's breast cancer, and so thank you for bringing that into the conversation.
How prevalent?
So it's much more likely that if a man has breast cancer, that there's a genetic mutation. So with women in breast cancer, it's more like 10%, and it's a significantly higher. So if a man has breast cancer, we definitely do genetic testing, and I can't tell you the exact percent, but much higher will have a genetic mutation that predisposes them. Yep. All right, Carmen.
When Judy was reading about light, it made me think this is one of my all-time favorite poems, and one of the reasons I put it in this mix for tonight is I think when people have a diagnosis of cancer, one of the things that I hear them talking about is legacy. You know, what will be remembered, and what will I leave behind? And so I think this is a fabulous poem about that. It's called For Joel at 94, and it's by Mark Nepo. They say that miners in South America strap small lamps around their chest, that this works better than light coming from the center of your head. They say the head can be fooled, but the heart can't turn without the body. This makes me think of you digging your way through your long life, lighting everything with your heart. It's a good way to live. And when we sit at the end of the day, our hearts illumine the day, and we see each other in its radiance. I can tell it reminds you of many circles you've been a part of. It's a good way to measure time, to make our way on earth by the light coming from our heart. This is what you've taught us. Is it any wonder that what you touch, including us, glows?
Beautiful. So I'm going to bring nature back in, and autumn. So we are now officially in autumn. And I'm going to go back to, again, the Kentucky farmer poet, Wendell Berry. And this is an autumn poem, and it is entitled Grace. The woods are shining this morning, red, gold, and green. The leaves lie on the ground or fall or hang, full of light in the air still. Perfect in its rise and in its fall. It takes the place it has been coming to forever. It has not hastened here or lagged. See how surely it has sought itself, its roots passing lordly through the earth. See how without confusion it is all that it is, and how flawless its grace is. Running or walking, the way is the same. Be still, be still. He moves your bones, and the way is clear.
I'll follow with the Mary Oliver.
Okay.
Stay with nature.
Great.
If you would like.
Absolutely.
Sure. Mary Oliver is what inspired the poetry salon at Carmen's, and and this is a poem by Mary Oliver entitled Poem of the One World. This morning, the beautiful white heron was floating along above the water, and then into the sky of this, the one world we all belong to, where sooner or later is a part, where everything sooner or later is a part of everything else, which thought made me feel for a little while quite beautiful about myself. Mm-hmm. There's something wonderful about many poets, but including Mary Oliver, that the last line is an aha moment, a delightful moment, a surprise. And so you're enjoying the language, you're enjoying her imagery, and then you just delight in a surprise. And so it's one of the many reasons I love Mary Oliver.
So Rebecca, do you have a Mary Oliver follow?
I don't have a Mary
Okay,
Oliver,
okay.
but I have a Rebecca Del Rio. And I like this one because of a little bit of what Carmen was saying, and all of us really, about being present. And I think that's a good prescription for not just for breast cancer, but for getting through COVID too. So this is called Prescription for the Disillusioned. Come new to this day. Remove the rigid overcoat of experience, the notion of knowing, the beliefs that cloud your vision. Leave behind the stories of your life. Spit out the sour taste of unmet expectation. Let the stale scent of what ifs waft back into the swamp of your useless fears. Arrive curious, without the armor of certainty, the plans and planned results of the life you've imagined. Live the life that chooses you. New every breath, every blink of your astonished eyes.
Well, okay, I'll do Mary Oliver with nature. And this is a very familiar poem, I think, to a lot of people, called When I Am Among the Trees. And one of the things that poetry is an invitation to slow down, to be present, as you said, and to notice. And so Mary Oliver is a master of that. So when I am among the trees, especially the willows and the honey locust, equally the beech, the oaks, and the pines, they give off such hints of gladness, I would almost say that they save me, and daily. I am so distant from the hope of myself, in which I have goodness and discernment and never hurry through the world, but walk slowly and bow often, which is a fabulous line and mantra. Around me, the trees stir in their branches and call out, "Stay a while." The light flows from their branches and they call again. It's simple, they say, and you too have come into the world to do this, to go easy, to be filled with light, and to shine.
Yeah, beautiful. Okay, I'm going to do a Mary Oliver too. I just changed though. There's humor in poetry as well. So I've chosen a little bit of an offbeat Mary Oliver that I like for both its nature and its quirkiness and also the humor that comes. She has a friend, Tom Dancer, and Tom Dancer gave her a white bark pine cone. And so the title of this poem is Tom Dancer's Gift of a White Bark Pine Cone. You never know what opportunity is going to travel to you or through you. Once a friend gave me a small pine cone, one of a few he found in the scat of grizzlies in Utah, maybe, or Wyoming. I took it home, and I did what I supposed he was sure I would do. I ate it, thinking how it had traveled through that rough and holy body. It was crisp and sweet. It was almost a prayer without words. My gratitude, Tom Dancer, for this gift of the world I adore so much and want to belong to. And thank you too, Great Bear.
That's great.
That's great.
Back to Judy.
Well,
Poetry
I
slam.
didn't bring a funny poem, but I was thinking of the Billy Collins poem that people. Can you pull that up? How reading a poem and tearing it apart.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. You get to do another one while I find this one.
Okay. I'm going to turn to another poet that we enjoy very much at the Poetry Salon, and that is Rumi. And his poem, "We want to believe we can live forever. And if I can't live forever, then let me make the most of this sliver of eternity, these slender days I've been given in the ongoing story. Let me be recklessly curious about what I will never know, driven to dance with the secrets of galaxy and spruce cone. Just this morning, I wondered, what wake will I leave behind? Let me be restlessly kind. Let me find peace with the imperfect self. Let me find love with the imperfect world. In my smallest moment, let me lean into enormity. If I can't live forever, let me at least believe in forever and love the world accordingly.
Beautiful. And you get the bonus now. So we
Okay.
have, thanks to modern technology,
Okay, good for
we
you.
have Introduction to Poetry by Billy Collins.
This is a lesson for those of you who have been told, or I don't get it. And here's what Billy Collins has to say. I ask them to take a poem and hold it to the light like a color slide, or press it air against its hive. I say drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk out inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin with beating it with a hose to find out what it really means.
That's good.
I did not know that poem. Thank you for sharing. That's
Yes.
Well, talking about Rumi, I wish I had brought a poem that I wrote, and I think I shared it at Poetry Salon called If Rumi Were Your Roomie, and how tedious would be with all that hopping up and down and joy and rhapsodizing so that you couldn't sleep. But here is one by John Wellwood, Forget About Enlightenment. Sit down wherever you are and listen to the wind singing in your veins. Feel the love, the longing, the fear in your bones. Open your heart to who you are right now, not who you would like to be, not the saint you are striving to become, but the being right here before you, inside you, around you. All of you is holy. You are already more and less than whatever you can know. Breathe out, touch in, let go.
Thank you.
Sure.
So this has some humor to it and also substance. So it's called What You Missed That Day You Were Absent from Fourth Grade by Brad Aaron Maudlin. Mrs. Nelson explained how to stand still and listen to the wind, how to find meaning in pumping gas, how peeling potatoes can be a form of prayer. She took questions on how not to feel lost in the dark. After lunch, she distributed worksheets that covered ways to remember your grandfather's voice. Then the class discussed falling asleep without feeling you had forgotten to do something else, something important, and how to believe the house you wake in is your home. This prompted Mrs. Nelson to draw a chalkboard diagram detailing how to chant the Psalms during cigarette breaks and how not to squirm for sound when your own thoughts are all you hear. Also, that you are enough. The English lesson was that I am is a complete sentence. And just before the afternoon bell, she made the math equation look easy. The one that proves that hundreds of questions and feeling cold and all those nights spent looking for whatever it was you lost and one person add up to something.
Yeah. I first heard that poem on Poetry Unbound with Padre Cotum. Is that where you heard?
No, I've had it around for a long time, but I'm glad he knows it.
Yes. And speaking of which, so this is a podcast that's part of the On Being, and it's Padre Cotum is Irishman. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correct, but he's also a poet.
Yep.
And so his latest one, he read a poem by Margaret Atwood. So I had not heard this before, and this was just earlier this week. So this will be my first time reciting this, and this is called All Bread by Margaret Atwood. All bread is made of wood, cow dung, packed brown moss, the bodies of dead animals, the teeth and backbones, what is left after the ravens. This dirt flows through the stems into the grain, into the arm, 9 strokes of the axe, skin from a tree, good water, which is the first gift, 4 hours. Live burial under a moist cloth, a silver dish, the row of white famine bellies swollen and taut in the ovens, lungfuls of warm breath stopped in the heat from an old sun. Good bread has the salt taste of your hands after 9 strokes of the axe, the salt taste of your mouth. It smells of its own small death, of the deaths before and after. Lift these ashes into your mouth, your blood. To know what you devour is to consecrate it, almost. All bread must be broken so it can be shared. Together, we eat this earth.
Goodness, that is something. Wow.
Yes, not quite the same as eating a pine cone from the scat of a grizzly bear.
There, that's right.
Okay, let's see. I think we each get one more poem.
Well, and very quickly, let me say also, we were blessed in Des Moines to have the National Poetry Festival for 15 years. And there are a couple of people who want to revive that. And so we hope very much that will be successful. And I'm sure all of us will participate in
Yeah.
helping that revival.
Wonderful.
It was wonderful. It was just wonderful. Okay. So here are some guidelines. Here's what you need to do. Since time began, find something, diamond rare or carbon cheap, it's all the same, and love it all you can. It should be something close, a field, a man, a line of verse, a mouth, a child asleep, that feels like the world's heart since time began. Don't measure much or lay things out or scan. Don't save yourself for later. You won't keep. Spend yourself now on loving all you can. It's going to hurt. That was the risk you ran with your first breath. You knew the price was steep. That loss is what there is since time began, subtracting from your balance. That's the plan. Too late to quibble now. You're in too deep. Just love what you still have while you still can. Don't count on schemes. It's far too short a span from the first sowing till they come to reap. One way alone to count since time began. Love something, love it hard, now while you can.
Beautiful. Judy, who was the poet?
Thank you. Rena Espelat. Carmen, do you know how to pronounce her name? This was
Reina Espelad.
okay. Thank you.
Beautiful. That was
Yeah,
beautiful.
that's
I
great.
had not heard that.
I was the recipient of a very big bouquet of poems from Carmen as I celebrated my last birthday, which was a very big birthday.
Belated happy birthday.
Thank
Yes. Well, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And I got that poem bouquet idea from Carmen too. And so I've done that many times, and people are just so much more delighted than if you bought them something, especially if you tailor the poem to them and whatever they're going through or for their birthday.
Yep.
It's just a wonderful idea. Well, this is called You Are That by Dana Falls. Throw off the bonds of your conditioning and fear and celebrate the wonder of being here. Experience this moment as it is, connected by breath and essence to the whole. You couldn't be separate if you tried. Live this day as if the earth exhales blessings in your direction, as if trees speak their deepest secrets in your ear, as if bird songs can lift you outside your ordinary state of mind and bring you into truth. Be the creative juice flowing through the universe. Be compassion in action and wholeness in motion. Be silence and stillness, the ocean of love so palpable that not one cell of you disputes the truth that you are that.
Well, here is a Padraig Toma.
Okay.
The facts of life. That you were born and that you will die. That you will sometimes love enough and sometimes not. That you will lie, if only to yourself. That you will get tired. That you will learn most from situations you did not choose. That there will be some things that move you more than you can say. That you will live. That you must be loved. That you will avoid questions most urgently in need of your attention. That you began as the fusion of a sperm and an egg of two people who once were strangers and may well still be. That life isn't fair, that life is sometimes good and sometimes better than good, that life is often not so good. That life is real, and if you can survive it well with love and art and meaning given where meaning's scarce. That you will learn to live with regret, that you will learn to live with respect, that the structures that constrict you may not be permanently constraining, that you will probably be okay, that you must accept change before you die, but you will die anyway. So you might as well live, and you might as well love. You might as well love. You might as well love.
That's beautiful. I think we'll close with that as our last poem. And I just want to thank Judy, Rebecca, Carmen. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your poetry. And we'll compile a list of the poems that we read and make them available for all of you. For those who want to share this session with others or want to go and listen to it again, we've created a video podcast with the help of By George. And this video podcast will be on the MercyOne Cancer Center website and also on the Above and Beyond Cancer YouTube channel. So again, I want to thank all of you for being here, and those of you in our live studio audience and those of you watching. And please come and join us again next week. Thanks again. Bye-bye. All right.